Shocking. Is Iowa State playing today? Iowa State's playing, aren't they? 7 o'clock tonight. Okay, there's still time. Don't worry, guys. Where is Iowa? Is Iowa State out in like California or something? I feel like they're like a long way. Nobody. Why did you guys not know? Where's UNI playing? See, even the UNI people don't know. Okay. All right. Well, good to see you all. Happy to be back today talking about geography, which I know you guys are just with bated breath waiting. Thank you, Nancy. We have. I saw the slides. There's a lot of cat and mouse, which I feel like I remember. This time. It was funny because I was like sitting at the edge of my seat. We have a day of lecture when I was in Israel, and so there was a day of lecture, and I could tell everybody else is like, I just want to go on tour, like let's just get out there and be on the bus, and I'm like eating this up because I love this kind of stuff, and then everybody else was like really tired, and anyways. So hopefully you're going to be like me and just like, oh my gosh, how does geography inform the biblical story? I'm so excited. And then we're going to talk about Israel and Palestine tonight. We have dinner today. Is anyone not going to eat dinner that's in this room right now? Otherwise, we're going to count you. Fantastic. That's great. So you're not going to eat dinner? You're not going to eat. Okay, just one is not going to eat dinner. Okay, fantastic. All right, so Paul, get up here because there's no point in me talking. Paul is back. Dr. Wright is back. Dr. Wright is back. So there you go. I didn't do a very good job. Like, Paul, you were president for how many years? Couple? And then we can get your mic level set too while we do this.
More than I wanted.
More than you wanted, yes.
Maybe
20 years?
Something like that?
Yeah, that's a while.
Like
and what's really cool is from Hebrew University, you'd bring in a lot of the professors, and it was quite a diverse array of instructors.
The goal was, the reason the school even exists. Ooh, this sounds extra loud. Maybe it is?
We're working on it. This is what we're testing.
We're testing it.
Yeah, we're testing it. Yeah.
The reason the school even exists is to not just have folks go to Israel and look at Bible and land, but to learn from the voices of the land directly.
Oh, yeah.
So rather than take a course in archaeology here, which you can get in a number of schools, let's get an Israeli archaeologist who's actually active in the field.
Yeah.
Rather than take a course on the parables of Jesus from a Christian professor who learned about parables in seminary, let's have an ordained Jewish rabbi who is fluent in New Testament Greek, but not a Christian, talk about what parables were for a first century Jewish audience, because there are hundreds of parables we have in Jewish literature that are not in the New Testament.
Yeah.
So how do they fit?
Yeah.
How do they fit, you see? So that's the goal, is to hear the voices of the land. If we're going to have a class on the society and politics of the Palestinians, why don't we hire an elected, seated member of the Palestine National Council? Which we did.
Why not?
So why not? Why not? If you're going to hear it directly.
Yeah.
Right? Rather than secondhand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know we sat on the steps going up to the Temple Mount, and I never thought about it, but it was from a Jewish perspective, like that's where they would teach.
Sure.
That's where Saul, learned good Jewish everything.
We didn't get to that slide last night.
Was that there?
That would have been 10 o'clock. We'd have to stay to get to that
wow.
picture.
Did you have a slide for that?
I did.
Can we do it real quick?
No.
Okay.
Maybe if we have time at the end.
Maybe during the dinner Q&A time.
You can ask me tomorrow during the service.
During the service. That's what we'll do. Okay,
there you go.
That's why you come to church. Okay.
There you go.
All right, Paul, everybody. Here we go.
All right. And that lecture, the first day, where you said, let's get into the field, and everybody else was falling asleep, that's on jet lag day. 8-hour time difference. And everybody can't make it past 9 o'clock. Right. 9 o'clock a.m. 9 o'clock a.m. They're already... All right. Well, good. Good to see everybody. I hope we're having a good day. I hope even those of you who are fans of the Washington Huskies are having a good day. Just in case there's one or two of you here, I don't know. but life is good, and I'm very glad to see everybody here as well. Our topic between now and 5 o'clock, right? Now and 5 o'clock. It might be 5:02 before we're done, something like that. Is geography and how geography informs the biblical story. And if you think that geography is something absent from the biblical story, all you have to do is take your Bible, Genesis, let's say through the book of Acts, and do this. Some people say, what's God's will for my life? Just open it and point. Open it and point, and you've got geography. You've got it exactly in front of you. And in whatever chapter you look at, Psalm 31 talks about God being the Lord, being a rock of strength, a stronghold, my rock, my fortress. Rocks are geographical objects. Wow. Rocks are hard, cold, and inanimate, without life. And the psalmist in Psalm 18, Psalm 31, and Psalm 78 says God is a rock. Cold, hard, and inanimate without life? How does that work? Well, maybe it's something else in the worldview and in the understanding of the psalmist and the first audience. And what we need to do, both when we're looking at the archaeological data, and I think that what we need to do when we're looking at geography, all aspects of the natural world on which we live, and it's the most difficult thing to do, actually, in the endeavor, is to try as much as we can to see that land through the eyes of its former inhabitants. That is to say, the actors who acted in the events we read about in the Bible, and the people who are writing about it, their eyes as to what their land was. Very difficult to do, but just because it's difficult doesn't mean we shouldn't try. So what I want to do this afternoon with you for the next hour and some is look at maybe one big picture statement. And I'll do it two different ways. But one big picture statement to introduce us to something about the place, the landscape, the environment into which the biblical actors and writers were living and talked about. So let's have the first slide. A few things I'll read. You can read them as well as me, but it'll at least get us on track here. Whether we read the Bible through the lens of literature, it's just a good story, right? Or we read the Bible through the lens of history. It tells us about what happened in the past. Or through the eyes of theology, says something about who God and people are. Or through the lens of ethics, talks about how to live rightly. Yeah? In any case, we cannot help but encounter its record of how God has interacted with the world over the course of the ages in ways that touch flesh and bone, that touch soil and water, that touch families and friends, enemies, and to pick a line from Churchill, blood, sweat, and tears. Heart, mind, and soul. And you can add a few nouns if you want as well. There are terms here that are typical theology terms. Soul and heart and friends and other things. There are terms here that we don't quite as often run into when we just look at the Bible in terms of theology, but they have to do with the real life place in which Israel was living, and God chose to interact. Soil, water, blood, sweat, and tears, lots of other things. Next slide. In the middle of all of this, God spoke to an eager yet often stubborn. If you want, you can take out the word often. An eager yet stubborn, right? That's maybe more human life like it really is. Band of people who were dug into, not just living on, but dug into a narrow, arid, dry land hugging the southeastern bend of the Mediterranean Sea. People who sometimes marked God's words well, but often looked forward though not often being able to see very clearly, still looking forward to a point in time when God would bring their relationship to completion. And through the New Testament, we know that is through Jesus. Our Jewish friends who are reading just Hebrew Bible, just Old Testament, are talking about a messianic ha'olam haba, a world to come. Whatever that's going to be like. In fact, yesterday morning, before we drove from Evanston, Illinois to here, I was at the dentist, and my dentist happens to be in Evanston, Illinois, an Israeli Jew who came as a youngster to Northwestern University to study engineering, and he ended up studying the engineering of the mouth instead. All his family is still in Israel. All his family is in Israel. And every time I go to see him, and it's been a few times, admittedly in the last year, because of various reasons, he always, knowing that I lived in Israel for a quarter century, wants to talk about what's happening over there. This time, as soon as he came into the room, he said, "I've been thinking about it, actually. How is this going to end?" And he said, "You know what? It can only end when Messiah comes." And I said, "You mean comes again?" And he said, "Okay, we'll find out when it happens," right? Something like that. Only when Messiah comes, he says, there has to be something divine that interacts. And he himself, he's kind of religious a little bit, but not really. But recognizing, right? Looking forward, though, let's go back to the other one. Looking forward, though not very clearly, to a point in time when God would bring our relationship with him to completion. All right. Now, Galatians 4:4. It's a verse that some folks memorize, some folks maybe it's familiar to you. Let me cite it to you, and then I'm going to take the liberty to emend the verse just a little bit. All right? Emend it just a little bit. You'll see why. Galatians 4:4. In the fullness of time. Or some of your translations say, when the time had fully come, God sent forth a son. God sent forth a woman born under the law who gave birth to a son. I'm missing up the verse. Let me read it actually. I've got my adjectives in front of my nouns here. Galatians 4:4. When the fullness of time had come, God sent forth his son, there it is, born of a woman, born under the law, that he might redeem those under the law, and so on. When the time had fully come. And what we tend to do is emphasize the time. What was it about that first century that made it right for God in the fullness of time to say, my revelation in the Old Testament period is complete. It's time to enter into world history again in a very personal way. It's time to enter as flesh and blood myself, and I will live as one of my chosen people under law, under Torah, under Mosaic instruction as to how to live, in order to show and then redeem, to empower, and allow my people to actually live that way. All right? What was it about the first century? And people talk about all kinds of things. They talk about the world was now under, basically the known world, whatever that means, under one empire, Rome, with a common language that went from one end to the next, Koine Greek. There were a highway system being put in to allow safe travel by regular people to spread the gospel. There happened to be in Rome's history a moment of great internal questioning about whether the Roman worldview, in terms of the gods and their will for our lives, is complete or not for us, or should we be looking for something else, etc., etc., etc. So at the right time, God came as Jesus. All right? Talk about the fullness of time. But my question is this. Okay, good. My question is this. How come he came to that land, that place? Why did he come to that place? And we can say, well, God chose to come as an infant Jesus born in Bethlehem because that's where David was born. But then we just have to throw the question back a little bit. Why? What's so special about God chose David to be king in that land? Why that land? Well, Joshua came into that land, and that's the land Joshua conquered and gave to the Israelites to live. Well, why did Joshua go there? Because when Moses was in Egypt, God said to Moses, go back to the land of the patriarchs, Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. That's why. Well, why did God tell Abraham to go to that land? You have to just back up the question. It's still the same question. What's so special about that place, if anything? You know, when Abraham was back in Ur of the Chaldees, end of Genesis chapter 11, and God says to his father, Terah, move up, and they move up to a place called Haran, which is now southern Turkey. And God says to Abram, go from this place, leave your house, your family, your father's house, your land, to a place that I will show you. Didn't say where it was. Genesis 12. Well, let's just head west, cross the Aegean, make your way over to Italy, swim a little bit, go up to the south of France. Monaco is going to be a nice place to live. Why don't we go there? You know? Or maybe to the one of the Egypt in those days, throughout the entire biblical period, the superpower, the repository of gold, the real gold, and the repository of the best grain fields in the entire Mediterranean and Roman world eventually. If you want to live comfortably on the cutting edge of civilization and technology, and life can be good, live in Egypt. Why doesn't God just take Abraham there? Throw Pharaoh out and put Abraham up. Why not? He can do it if he wants to. Why stop in Canaan? Why there? And the Jewish rabbis, to help answer that question in the Middle Ages, said, that's actually where Eden was. When God created that special garden, it's that plot of ground which someday became Jerusalem. Now, I can't show that archaeologically or scientifically. You'll never find a Bible atlas that shows that. Maybe there should be. But theologically, it works really nice. That God creates a special place for people to live in, people rebel and are driven out, and the rest of human history is getting you back to where you belong. And of course, the book of Revelation ends with a new heaven and a new earth, which is pictured as Jerusalem descending. So there's maybe something there, but there's bigger reasons as well. Bigger reasons. What about this place? Is it just any old spot? Or is it a spot that is, in certain ways, more appropriate than others, both in terms of its overall location and in terms of its makeup and character, that you don't have in other places? And if we can look a little bit at that now, maybe you'll have a grid as we start to look at, or you would start to look at in other places, other times, other contexts, other Bible events that take place in this land, and say, hey, maybe I can start to pay attention to some of the more fine-tuned geographical information in the text as well. All right? In the fullness of place, God sent forth his Son. All right, next. More than that. If you think that that's just, wishful thinking, forcing something in the biblical text, in the Hebrew Bible, in the Old Testament itself, all right, the fifth most frequently occurring noun. Look, the most often word is the word the or right? But leave those alone. The most often, the most frequently occurring noun in the Old Testament is the word Lord. Number 2, the word Son. Number 3, the word God. Number 4, the word King. What do you think number 5 is? Number 5, next slide. Land. 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 Hebrew term eretz. Specifically, it's used for a place chosen and prepared for God's specially chosen and prepared for people to live. And if you want, you can do this with your fingers. Just kind of make one of those, a pyramid or a triangle. And the top point, God, and the 2 bottom points, people and land. Specifically, God, his chosen people, if you want to say the Davidic line, if you want. Land, the place, the land of Israel, Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel, where God is choosing to bring them. Whether it's where Eden was or not, I don't know. But this relationship between the two, between the 3, all 3 being characters and actors in the story. God knowing that people live in places, are from places, and saying, I want to not just give you afterlife, but a fullness of life, so that you can fully live the way you're supposed to in this place where I have chosen you to live. Whether that's Jerusalem or Cedar Rapids or someplace in between. I want you to live full and complete. The word is shalom. Full and complete lives there. And let me show you how you can do that. And the Bible does that by taking land and people seriously as a unit living under God. Okay, next slide. The line between biblical geography, then, and biblical theology. It blurs easily in a land that is holy, a land that is chosen. Psalm 85, verse 1. Psalm 85, verse 1. There are hundreds of verses in the Psalms that we could have picked instead, or in the prophets that we could have picked instead. Just one. Lord, you showed favor to your land. You restored the fortunes. Don't think just economy there. Think about fullness of life. You restored fullness of life to Jacob, your chosen person, and his descendants. God, you showed favor to land and people, choosing both of them to come and live together. Right? All right. Next slide. And so to unpack some of this in the next hour and, hang on. Oh, we have an hour and 5 minutes. That's good. All right. 7 minutes. I said 5:02. Something about cats, mice, and the eyes of the Lord in a land between. Cats, mice, eyes of the Lord in a land between. And you can see the map here in the middle is the map of the land of ancient Israel. It's a topography map. It doesn't show any names of places. It's just the shape of the land itself, like blank slate for Abraham to come in. All right, next slide. We'll start big. Let's start big. Ooh. Something is not stored right when we did the slide on the thing, but never mind. We can make sense out of this map anyway. You see here, you see this big square? That shouldn't be there. Something got saved wrong. And the little square down here, what we have is an oval instead. So just focus on the oval, the big green oval, and focus on the little yellow oval instead. All right? Focus on those instead. You have to erase the rest from your mind. We'll manage it. What you're looking at here is a map of the lands of the Bible, plural lands of the Bible, all the way from the book of Esther all the way to the book of Romans. The middle is what I want to focus on. So let's just look at the map for a minute. on the right-hand side of the map, to the right of the square that you don't see, right? To the right-hand side of the map, this is what we tend to call the ancient Near East. On the left-hand side of the map, this is what we typically call the Mediterranean world, or the classical world. Ancient Near East, classical world. This is mostly a land-based, mountainous and dry environment. This is mostly a water-based environment, wet. This is mostly camel caravans or slow donkey caravans, either for trade or armies. This is ships moving through. This is mostly desert, where the ports of call are where the land starts to become arable and the cities are out of the desert. This is mostly water, where the ports of call are along the shoreline. All right, seaports and camel ports, depending on which way you're coming. This is mostly the world of the Old Testament. This is mostly the world of the New Testament. All right? And in the middle, you have this land between. You have the eastern seaboard of the Mediterranean Sea, which is equally part of the ancient Near East and the classical world. It's equally part of the Old Testament and the New Testament. It is also the only spot on the globe that is the junction point, as you know, I think. Not going to surprise anybody here. The junction point of, I'm going to say 4 continents from the point of view of the people in the Old Testament. Europe, Asia, Africa, and this Arabian Peninsula. It's not a continent, it's part of Asia, but it's a big enough land mass in and of itself, surrounded by water in and of itself, that it really functioned kind of as a 4th unit, 4 quadrants. And this is the connection point. This spot here on the eastern Mediterranean has been called a land bridge. Do you know that term? A land bridge. A land bridge. That term has been around for quite a while, trying to understand its unifying, its connectedness, its hub, if you want, joining the rest together. This land bridge between the two. What I also am showing on the map here, some red lines, which are highway lines, international highway lines, imperial trade routes coming out of Asia or Europe or Africa or Arabia, and some blue lines, which are sea routes coming out of Europe or Asia or the edge of Africa as well, also all joining at this hub, at this center, this land bridge. More than that, if you want to look a little more closely, if you come out of the Persian Gulf, modern Iraq, work your way up the Tigris and Euphrates rivers until the Euphrates comes within about 100 miles of the Mediterranean Sea, down the coast of the sea, down across the Sinai into northeastern Africa, you can go up the Nile. Tigris, Euphrates, and Nile. Tigris and Euphrates and Nile. In both cases, the Tigris and the Euphrates on the one hand and the Nile on the other, you have true world-class rivers. Think Mississippi, Amazon, that level of river. You know, the Yangtze River in China, that level of river. What do the rivers give you? The rivers are providing fresh water all year long, which can be used to irrigate the flatlands on either side, to open up tracts of arable land. The rivers can be used as channels of communication, as highways, linking peoples together, like an interstate highway does today, linking peoples together, right? And people then attracted to the water and the arable soil, building villages and then towns which become cities, which then share cultural awarenesses, eventually political connections, and eventually empires with large urban centers along these rivers, along these river valleys, eventually Mesopotamia and Egypt. And life can be really good in all of these places. The superpowers of the day, on every level: economy, culture, arts, science, education, sports, whatever category you want that makes a place a superpower place, you've got them in Egypt and in Mesopotamia throughout the time of the Old Testament and New Testament. The contrary here in this green oval, you don't have world-class rivers running through it. Oh, you've got a world-famous river named the Jordan River. But the Jordan, how wide is the Cedar River? What would you say in terms of feet as it goes through town? 100 yards, 300 feet at least. Some places wider probably. Some places maybe, okay, 300 feet. The Jordan River, it's between me and you. That's it. In this riverbed. It's about 30 feet, maybe 30 feet. Maybe 30 feet. Okay, between me and you. That's about it. It's world famous because of it's the only river that runs almost its entire length below sea level. The Sea of Galilee, by the way, is 2.5 times lower than Death Valley. Sea of Galilee is 2.5 times lower than Death Valley. All right? So it's famous on that sense, but it's also famous because of the biblical associations, the way it's talked about in the Bible, what it comes to be in the biblical narrative. But it's no Tigris, Euphrates, and Nile. And this is not a flat land that can be irrigated. This land between here is a land of, it's going to be rugged hills and narrow valleys for the most part, and you can't irrigate uphill to make a broad field. And the hills are going to separate people rather than unite them. And it's going to be a small population because the resource base is less to draw from on every criteria. And it is not going to hold a high population. And the population it does have is going to be naturally divided and divisive one from the other because you're on the other side of the mountain. And you learn to talk funny compared to me because you're not easily united. All right? Historically, that's this land from the earliest records we have, every time we look at it up until today in history. Yeah? Next slide. These places round about, I'm labeling with names, most of them you can probably recognize. Let's see. Rome, Greece. You tell me what they all have in common. I can think of a couple of things, all right? Rome, Greece, Egypt, Babylon, Persia, Assyria, Mitanni, Hittites, not Israel, Judah. That's where all the arrows are going to. But all the rest of these, what do they all have? Number one, all of them sometime during the time of the Old Testament are true empires, true superpowers on all those criteria. That's one thing they have in common. The other thing they have in common is this. None of them are at home. That is to say, none of them came from. None of them's home base is here. The home base of Rome is here. The home base of Greece is here. The home base of Egypt is here. You get the idea? For all of them, this is this critically important bridge is frontier for everybody. If you're an empire, it's frontier for everybody. It's fighting ground for everybody. It's in order for Egypt to come here, guess where you need to go? In order for Rome to come here, guess where you need to go, etc. It's this quadrant, this bullseye, this hub. All of them are empires. All right, next slide. If you want the economy thing, I don't want to mention this quickly, but or at any in depth at all, but you might want to look at the book of Ezekiel chapter 27 and verses 12 to 25. I don't want to do it right now, but it's a long list of the expensive stuff. All right? The camel caravan, the expensive stuff. You know, the Lamborghinis and the F-16s and the high-speed internet stuff and, you know, the stocks and bonds, and put in there whatever you want. The expensive commodities of the day and where they come from. The days of Ezekiel, end of the period of the kingdom of Judah. And it's a fun list. You know, iron and bronze utensils and war horses and turquoise and precious stones and linen and ivory tusks and all kinds of things, all going through Tyre, modern Lebanon. Tyre as a port that is taking from here to there and from here to there, and Israel, Judah, right next to Tyre, right next to Lebanon today. What does it contribute to the world's supply? Wheat, honey, and oil, basically. The commodities of life. Because unlike Israel and Judah, that does have some arable land, Tyre is backed right up against the hills coming out of the Mediterranean Sea and can't support itself. And so ancient Israel ends up being their grocery store. So they can trade in all kinds of expensive commodities and grow wealthy in the process. And Ezekiel is basically saying, look at them. They're sitting so pretty, that middleman, they're going to go down too someday. And the Israelites all saying, yeah, but I wish I were them in the process. Yeah? Next slide. All right. We're zooming in a bit here. On the actual land itself. Today, each of those empires that we just showed you is a large nation state. Rome is Italy, Greece is Greece, Egypt is Egypt. Sorry, not a large nation state. Yeah, they're a large country. You know, the Hittites are Turkey, Assyria and Babylon is Iraq, Persia is Iran. This circle in the middle that we were looking at, maybe it looked like a square to you. I only saw the circle, right? That square in the middle on the other map. Who's in there today? That eastern seaboard of the Mediterranean Sea. Who's in there today? Israel, Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, part of Egypt, part of Saudi Arabia, the Palestinians, and a whole bunch of other people who are nameless in the current conflict. Is it unified as one country today? Nope. Do some people in there today want it to be unified as one country? Yup. Well, that'll be after lunch's map. After dinner's map. Right? It's a land that even today is a land divided with people who talk funny to each other, who kind of share a common culture but don't want to admit it, and struggle over who's going to be in control of that place. When you focus in that land biblically, all right, and what we've got here are a number of people around. These lines, again, Taylor, you were right. Where is Taylor? Where are you? You're upstairs. You were right. Something's missing here. Never mind. These boxes are pointing. There should be arrows in these boxes. Something didn't come through in the saving of the jump drive when we put it in the machine, but that's fine. These are arrows coming from where they live into the land. Think of these as arrows coming in, all right? Think of these as arrows coming in. We've got, when Abraham arrives here, Canaanites and Amorites. Those are generic terms for people living in this land. Everybody else you meet on the stage of the biblical narrative is coming from someplace else. Phoenicians, Greeks, Romans, Philistines, coming in off of the Mediterranean, Hittites coming in from the north, Egyptians, Amalekites, other coming in from the south and the southwest, Assyrians, Babylonians, Syrians, just generally speaking Semites, like in Abraham, are actually coming in this way. These are tipped a bit, coming in this way. Edomites and Nabateans are coming in off of the Arabian Peninsula. Ammonites, do you know some of these names? They're all in the Old Testament, most of them. Moabites and Israel, following Joshua, coming in from the east. People pressing in. Now, we need to put these people into two different categories. Two different categories. And to do that, I want you to think a little bit about a common household situation of life for some of you. Two animals that you meet sometimes in houses. Sometimes old farmhouses have both of them. Sometimes, city people don't like either one. But farmhouses have both of them. I want you to think about cats, and I want you to think about mice. Cats and mice. All right, think about cats and mice. What are some differences between cats and mice? Cats and mice. Cats. First of all, cats. What are some adjectives that describe cats? Predators. All right. They're on the prowl a lot, aren't they? All right. Where do cats like to go? The answer is any place they want to, right? Where do cats like to lay down at night and sleep? Any place they want to. How much do cats like to eat? As much as they want to, as often as they want to. How long are their claws? Even if you declaw your cat, there's still a little bit of cat still left in them. Can you tame a cat? Not really. The cat tames you, basically. You adjust your schedule for the needs of the cat. The cat tames you. Yep. Isn't that great? And they kind of they're territorial. They like to move around a bit. Have you heard cats fight? Yeah. It's a law. Everybody knows it. Everybody knows it. They make a big mess, right? What about mice? Think about mice for a minute. I want you to characterize mice. Mice. Predators? Not really. Not really. If a cat came in this room, all right, if a cat came in this room, likely where might it go? It would jump in the seat next to you or something, a cat would. It would just wander down the aisle and prowl around a little bit. We had a cat one time come into our campus building in Jerusalem when the professor was standing up, and the cat came in the door of the room, in the door of the building, through the hall, in the door of the classroom, up to the front of the classroom, and jumped up and sat on this chair and just looked out, just its head just over the table, looking out at everybody else. This is what cats do. They go where they do what they want. What about a mouse? If a mouse were in this room, where would it go? Where would you see it? You wouldn't see it. You wouldn't see it. It would be hiding back here someplace. Maybe, if it's running, you would see it right where the wall meets the floor. Yeah? Just scooting along there and then out, but you probably wouldn't see it at all. Mice like enclosed places. Mice like to be hidden. They like to be hidden, do they not? Yeah, in a way. How much will a mouse eat? Well, again, as much as it wants to, but how much actually is that compared to a cat? Not very much. You can put the food out for a cat. The cat can eat all it wants. The mouse can come later. Scraps left in there, it can still get a feast. Doesn't need that much. How much of a noise does a mouse make? Usually not much. They're pretty silent. And have you seen mice fight? They do, actually. National Geographic had hidden cameras and saw mice get up and do all of this. But it's not a big fight, comparatively speaking. You know, smaller muscles, right? Littler teeth. It's not as big of a fight. Ah. But when the cat's away, which means it may end up in the middle of the room, right? Or if you do German, if the cat's away, the mouse will dance. The mouse will dance, is the German idiom. Dance, some will say, on the table. The mouse will dance. Yeah. All right. When the cat's away. Now here's what I want you to do. I want you to use those two images of a cat and cat-like behavior and mice and mouse-like behavior and needs and size and all of this stuff, right? And I want us then to use those to characterize the people groups on this map. Some of these are cats and some of these are mice, biblically, in the world of the Bible. Who do you think the cats are? The cats. The next slide. Let's see if it works. Cats. There they are. You see the cat? Greece, Rome, Egypt. Well, here it is. The Hittites, the Babylonians, you see coming off here. You've got the Edomites and the Nabateans. The cats are coming in. On the prowl, away from their home to start to find new lands to cross and lay down in and eat off of. Right? And they're moving through this land in the process. When these people groups show up in the Bible, and they do sometimes, not very often, but when they do show up in the Bible, you have to ask, what are they doing here? You know, when Babylon shows up in the Bible, the Babylonians, it's with the army of Nebuchadnezzar moving in, conquering and destroying Jerusalem. And the Bible talks about that event and doesn't say much about before and after, because it's interested in Jerusalem, that chosen spot, the chosen God people land spot. If you would ask Nebuchadnezzar, what are you doing in Jerusalem? Nebuchadnezzar would say, I don't really care about Jerusalem. I'm on the way to Egypt. The cat is going to fight the cat. We want the world's grain supply and gold supply in Egypt. We want the ports that Egypt has down to Africa and up into the Mediterranean Sea. We want that under the control of Babylon. And as Nebuchadnezzar is working his way to Egypt, a mouse right here, Jerusalem, decides they're going to try to take on the cat. And what happens when a mouse decides it wants to fight a cat? 100% of the time, what happens to the mouse? It gets eaten up. It gets eaten up. But that wasn't Nebuchadnezzar's goal. His goal in life, Nebuchadnezzar didn't wake up some morning and say, the pinnacle of my career is going to be take Jerusalem. No, it's going to be to take Egypt. Jerusalem's a speed bump that has to be erased in the process. That's Nebuchadnezzar's point of view. God uses that in ways that the biblical authors talk about, because the story of the Bible is not the story about Egypt and Babylon per se, even though they need Jesus too, right? But the story is the story about all these green peoples, and one in particular. How shall we characterize them? What's the next slide say? Let's make them mice coming in on a scooter, just hoping to, be in the land. The Philistines, the Phoenicians, the Syrians, Ammon, Moab, Edom, Israel, Judah. All of them on kind of the geopolitical definition. Small things, small populations. Weak people compared to what else is going on in the rest of the world. All of them are entering the land when the cat is away. There happens to be a moment in time around 1200 BC, if you want a time. Around 1200 BC, when all of the cats get sick and go home at the same time. Egypt Empire falls. There is no Rome yet. The Greek Empire, for what it was in those days, is falling apart. One of the remnants of the Greeks are the Philistines that move in. Babylon, early Babylon, is on the wane. The Hittites have collapsed. The Nabateans don't exist yet. And all the cats are away, and this land is empty except for the indigenous Canaanites and these other people groups, small groups, saying our own ethnicity, our own peoplehood wants to have a place to live and grow. All right? And how much space does a mouse need to live and grow? Not that much. In fact, mice prefer hidden spots, the other side of the hill. I'll have another accent, it doesn't matter. I don't need that much resource to live. We're just a small people, we can manage it. And when the cat's away and remains away over the course of 300-400 years, which is what happened, some of the mice states, some of the small nation states round about, what do they end up doing? They start tussling with each other for control within this land itself. They start tussling with each other a little bit. And so the Bible, because it's the story of God's choice of Israel, and Israel is a small place centered in the middle of this, basically, its heartland, with these others all on the map round about them, Israel the center of this land between, which is the center of the empire land between. Israel's exactly in the middle of all of it, actually. Has to come to terms with their local interactions and fights and what have you on this very challenging land that doesn't have much in terms of resource, but is very strategic in terms of what could be. Okay, next picture. There you go. Last king of Judah, Zedekiah. There he is. Who's this? Yeah. Nebuchadnezzar. There he comes, right? Or if you want another example, next picture. The last greatest king of Judah, on the next one, King Josiah. One of the greatest kings of ancient Judah. Almost messianic in terms of his ability. Necho, king of Egypt, comes up. Josiah says, I want to meet you. Or Necho calls Josiah up to Megiddo and says, are you standing in my way? Egypt is on its way to move north into Assyria. Are you standing in my way? Josiah says, yes, I am. Necho says, okay, this is what happened to people who stand in my way. And the Judean kingdom ends up here as mincemeat, it's just nothing. It's nothing. Next picture. Cats and mice in a land between. After dinner, we can ask whether Israel is still a mouse rather, or has become a cat. We can ask that after dinner. But throughout the time of the Old Testament, a small people group living in a land that is marginally resourced, yet at the hub of the ancient world. And that's a very interesting dynamic. It's part of a biblical theme that you find out in individual storylines all the way through, in fact. God chose Abraham. Just a guy. Just a Bedouin shepherd type. Abraham had two sons, Ishmael and Isaac. Who was older? Ishmael was older. The older one usually gets the birthright and the blessings and the promises, advantages going forward in life that the younger one doesn't have. Who does God choose? Isaac, the younger. Isaac has two sons, Jacob and Esau. Who is older? Esau is older. Who does God choose? Jacob. right? Jacob has 12 sons. Some of them, the oldest of his sons, are to his unfavorite wife. The youngest of his sons are from his favorite wife, the youngest son, Joseph, the one chosen to go to Egypt and redeem Israel in Egypt. David is the youngest of his brothers. Yeah. Bethlehem is the smallest place in Judah, chosen to be the birthplace of Messiah. And in 1 Corinthians, Paul says something to the Corinthians to the effect that not many of you were wise or wealthy or good-looking or had abilities, but God chose you to be saved anyway. And what if God would have said in the fullness of time, wow, isn't Rome a great empire? Let me come down and be born son of Caesar. Wouldn't that have been great? Son of Caesar, Jesus could have been. How would the history of God's redemptive plan been different? Right? As opposed to a nameless, in terms of what people of the day knew, we know her as Mary, unwed mother giving birth in a town far from home to a guy who has already been embarrassed because he's not supposed to continue to be wedded to someone who must have been a prostitute this late. I don't know, loose woman, something to get impregnated. You know, oh yeah, sure, an angel is what the neighbors say, right? Oh yeah, an angel. Yeah. What chance does Jesus have? Fullness of time and fullness of place, that was God's choice. Israel as a people. Israel as a people. You know, I as a Gentile cannot say this publicly, so I'm quoting an Israeli Jewish friend of mine. So this guy said it. I'm just relaying the words, you know. You know, what is the one term that describes us the best, an Israeli Jew would say today? Survivors we are, right? We're just a bunch of rascals. I don't know why God has anything to do with us anymore, my Israeli Jewish friend says. Now, is that true humility? Is that, self-effacing? Is that an honest statement? Is that trying to get my sympathy? I don't know any of those. But there's a bit of a statement in there that rings what your average Israelite must have thought about themselves, surrounded by this world of empire, so seductive, but we know that we're not supposed to be them. And these neighbors around us that have funny accents and talked about different deities. And why does God choose us in this place? So Moses is bringing Israel out of Egypt. Moses is bringing Israel out of Egypt. My tour guide friends in Israel used to say, if God would have told Moses when he came out of Egypt, turn right instead of turning left, we'd have all those oil reserves today. And instead we've got nothing but rock, you know. So we go left, and after receiving instruction from God on Mount Sinai, what's the Hebrew word for instruction? You all know the Hebrew word for instruction. Torah. Torah. It's translated usually in English as law, but it's much deeper than just that. Instruction for how to live on every level, some of which is legal material. Much of it is other stuff. Receives that on Mount Sinai, enters this land of promise from the east, enters from the east. When God drove Adam and Eve out of the Garden of Eden, he sent them eastward. And now Joshua following Moses coming back from the east back into a land. Back into a land. And Moses is not with them, but Moses, right at the cusp of this land of promise, this land, this Canaanite land, looking into it from the eastern side of the Jordan River on what are called the plains of Moab, flat, just looking straight in. The book of Deuteronomy is a book where Moses, like a good preacher, opens his mouth and can't stop talking. He opens his mouth in chapter 1 and doesn't stop talking until chapter 33. All right? He just keeps going and going. Maybe he's, half politician too, I don't know. But just keeps going. And in chapter 5 of Deuteronomy, he restates the 10 words of God. We call them the commandments. The Hebrew Bible calls them the 10 words of God, uttering up from within, describing his identity. And from chapter 6 all the way to chapter 11 of Deuteronomy then, Moses explains what that first word is all about. Have no other gods before me. I, the Lord, am your God, who brought you out of Egypt. Explaining what that means. And at one point in chapter 11 of Deuteronomy, Moses, in kind of his last will and testament series of sermons here, says this: the land, Eretz, the land that you are about to enter to possess is not like the land of Egypt from which you came. 40 years before we came out of Egypt. We were living there for hundreds of years as a people. We learned to live there, okay. Eventually, we ended up being subjugated by Pharaoh in ways that are akin to slavery. In the end, we didn't like it a lot. But we still sort of know what it's like to live there. We know the climate, we know the landforms, we know the people. We were living in our own community, but that's kind of where we were. We knew how to manage it. And Moses says, the land into which you are now going to possess is not like the land of Egypt from which you came. And in order to remind everybody where that was or what it was like, he doesn't say, remember the pyramids? Remember the pyramids? Remember Pharaoh? Remember his army? Remember the chariots of Pharaoh? Remember the great temples to the gods Horus and Isis and all these places? Remember all the boats coming up and down the rivers full of gold and grain? Remember how the nations used to come to us in Egypt and want what we had? Moses doesn't say any of that. He says none of that. The greatness that made Egypt, Egypt, he ignores. And all he says is this: the land of Egypt, the land that you were entering to possess is not like the land of Egypt, which you came from. Where? And he uses a everyday geographical lifestyle terms. Where you used to sow your seed, farmers they are, and water it with your foot like a vegetable garden. That was the land of Egypt. Wait a minute. Okay, this is what we used to do. Okay. Sow your seed, water it with your foot. Some of your English translations want to help you. So some of your English translations of this say, water it by hand, like a vegetable garden. Or some even say, water it manually, like a vegetable garden. How do you water a vegetable garden today? You use a hose, maybe, or sprinkler, right? Turn on the faucet, right? And something like that. These things are not invented yet, right? By foot, some commentaries will say, you know, you pedal, and then the chain goes onto a rod, gear onto a rod that turns a water wheel that lifts water out of the Nile and brings it, right? Not invented yet in Moses' day. Not invented yet. And the word is by foot. So next slide, this is what we have. This is today, but it could be ancient. Egypt, the land is incredibly flat on both sides of the Nile until you get to the mountains, but they're a little ways off. The Nile River Valley, nice and flat. The Nile runs in its banks. Historically, certainly in the time of the Bible, beginning of every July and going to every October. July, August, September, October, 4 months. The season of inundation. When the rains in Ethiopia and in Uganda that have fallen into the Blue and White Nile all make their way into Egypt through the Nile, and it overflows its banks, and it broadens out and sinks and floods the entire floodplain. And then the waters subside. And after the waters subside, go back into the banks of the Nile for the next 8 months of the year. The farmer then will take the flat field, make ridges, low ridges, about this high, about like that, of soil, to make pans or sections of the field. And then the Nile has already some pretty deep irrigation channels coming off of it. And what you do is you tap into one of those, make a little canal coming into your field. And the water here is now flowing all the time from that Nile River. And what you do is you take your foot, water it with your foot, and just drag your foot across this. And it opens up a little opening, and the water comes in. And it continues to irrigate your field so that you can grow crops continually for 8 months or so during that season. Next slide shows the water coming in. It just comes. If you want, you can use a hoe, but you can just do this. It's not hard. And next picture, you get fields like this. All right, and you Iowans say, "Oh, so what?" All right, but this is a. You can see the internal fields here, right? The floodplains here, right? As you go. And relatively speaking, because the water is running through the Nile all the time, flood or not, and because the irrigation system is set up, with relatively little effort, you can have your abundant, overflowing barn. And life is predictable, and life is relatively easy, and life is secure, and life can be wealthy, and life can be full. And Egypt is the superpower. And that's not where we're going to live. We're going to live someplace else. Because this isn't your home. You were not made for this land. I did not make this land for you. And so let me take you to a land to possess that is not like the land of Egypt from which you came, where life was like this. And instead, we're going to enter into Canaan. And what is Canaan like? That hub of the land between. Next picture. But the land, Moses says, is not into which you are about to cross to possess is, and how does he describe it? A land of hills, and then the valleys. And as soon as you say a land of hills, what happens to your vast floodplain that can be irrigated? You don't have it. It doesn't exist. Tiny, tiny spots in the land to have it. But the bulk of the land is a rocky, stony land, this land of ancient Israel. Yep. And where does it get its water from? Not the Nile that flows constantly and all you have to do is this and it's going to come into your field. Where does the water come from in this land? That basic stuff of life that you need to live. Where does it come from? He says. And the word here is actually the word Shemaim. It means it's sky, so clouds and rain. But the implication is everything above that and that controls that. So we say heaven. In other words, the point is, where does everything necessary of life come from for you? Not from yourself. Not from yourself. Who controls the ability and the access for everything that you need for life? Not you. Not you. You can't teach that in ancient Egypt. Get out of there. Let me show you what real life is like. All right? Next slide. This is what Moses is looking at when he's saying this. They're standing on the plains of Moab, looking across the Jordan River at the plain of Jericho. And beyond the plain of Jericho, the hills going up into the hill country, which is going to be called the wilderness of Judah. This is his view looking west into the land of promise. What time of year is it? This is springtime. We're talking about a land that has seasonal rainfall. Seasonal rainfall, November through March. And it's rainy season, you can tell because of the rainbow, right? It's rainy season. And this picture happens to be taken late rainy season when this part of the land, everything you can see from the plains of Moab looking up into your land, is as green as it's ever going to be. That's it. It's never going to be more green than this month of late rains. And compare that to 2 pictures ago of Egypt. This is the land you're entering to possess. And what do you think everybody who's in the pew listening to Moses is thinking? Well, I think we made a wrong turn somewhere on the way out of Egypt. Right? How come we, all that in the wilderness? Another U-turn and back where we came from. Next slide. Next slide tells you what the Egyptians thought about Canaan. Here's what the Egyptians thought about Canaan. That poor country that has to depend on rainfall. They would laugh about Canaan. They would laugh about it. That edgy frontier wasteland. Or we do have records as well from ancient Egyptians, from the time of the Bible, people who go to Canaan and come back and talk about it. And it's nothing but a land of danger, Canaan. Danger, no one to help me. I'm running into trouble all the time. Briars and thorns, the heat is eating me up. I want to be home along the banks of the Nile where life is easy. This is what all the Egyptians would say, based on the records we have, going back home again, in the time of Moses, in the time of the New Testament. Or if you prefer a New Testament era quote, this next one. All right, this is Strabo. It's a little smaller here, so let me read it for you. Strabo, he was a Greek geographer from the time of Jesus, time of the 1st century, time of New Testament, and he wrote a geography, an account of the land all across the Roman Empire. And here's what he says about the land of Judea, Canaan. All right? Now Moses led them, the Israelites, away to this place where the settlement of Jerusalem now is. In other words, into this land of Canaan. And he, Moses, well, he meant Joshua, but he hadn't read his Old Testament well enough to get all the names straight. So we have to excuse Strabo for saying Moses instead of Joshua. He easily took possession of the place, since it was not a place that would be looked upon with any envy. Who wants it? This is the Greek view. the Latin view in the time of the New Testament of this land. It's the same as the Egyptian had in the Old Testament. Nor yet for which anyone would make a serious fight. For it is rocky, and although it itself, Jerusalem, is well supplied with water, the surrounding territory is barren and waterless, and the part of the territory within a radius of 60 stadia, 7 miles out, is what Strabo was talking about. You could say 70 miles out if you want, is also rocky beneath the surface. And the Greeks laughed about it. The Romans laughed about it. Why are the Romans here in the time of the New Testament? Why are they in Judea, Galilee, Samaria? Caesar didn't wake up and say, oh, my goal of my life is to conquer Jerusalem. He wanted to make sure that the entire Mediterranean seaboard, irrespective of what the land is like, in any spot of it, is Roman. He wanted to seal the Mediterranean to make it a one-nation sea, and then occupy every square inch of that border so that he could launch off of all of these angles to the cats beyond. And we happen to catch him in the time of the New Testament right after he is within 2 generations of sealing, of taking the land of Judea and starting to settle it as a Roman colony so they can go beyond into Babylon and Persia. That's what's happening. God said, that's a good time for me to come. Yeah, it's a nice place. So what do? If you're an Israelite following Moses, and Moses knows good and well you guys are saying, yeah, Egypt wasn't all that bad. What do? So Moses says, let me finish the sentence. All right, so next slide. It is a land. Now look at the nouns. Remember those most common nouns in the Old Testament? It was a land, number 5, which the Lord, number 1, your God, number 3, in terms of commonality of nouns. And what's the verb? Cares for. Cares for. The word Lord here, capital L, capital O, capital R, capital D, whenever it shows up in your Bible, sometimes it shows up small letters. Whenever it's capital letters, that is the Lord God's personal name. The name revealed at Mount Sinai. His personal identity. It's the name that religious Jews will not pronounce. It's the name that some people today incorrectly pronounce Jehovah. All right? It comes from a verb that means to live. To be an ever-existing one, giver of life. That's the essence of the name. The one who always is and always will be alive. And what's the pronoun? The Lord, your. That makes it personal to the people. And what's the verb? Cares. For you and the land. Place where you are in life. Now Egypt, the land from which we have come, Moses could also have said, remember that land? The land of 1,000 gods and goddesses. I'll tell you, that Egyptian pantheon, you can't count them all. They're like the stars of the sky and the sand on the seashore. There are so many deities. But they all share one thing in common, all those Egyptian deities. In the conception of the Egyptian worldview, they all share one thing in common. They all care about themselves. They care about themselves. And people kind of get in the way. And so when people need deities to fight an army or to have a child or whatever, when somebody is ill, you have to find your deity who might be on a good day wanting to listen a little bit, and you'd better bring them some kind of nice present to kind of, I'll be quite blunt, buy them off. or placate them. So they'll maybe at least, maybe help a little bit and see you through. They're the gods of Egypt. And what's the only verb we have in this sentence? About the ever-living God of life, who is your God. He is a God who, for what? The land, the place where you are, and you living on it. And you living on it. And in order to help describe that, to help internalize that, the eyes of the Lord your God are always on it, from the beginning even to the end of the year. Now, Deuteronomy 11 continues by talking about seasons and holidays and agricultural cycles and all kinds of things about what it is going to be like to actually live in Canaan and to have a life that will be full of God's shalom, his peace, his fullness for you, and what it's like. That's the rest of the book of Deuteronomy. But this sentence, the eyes of the Lord your God are always on it. Always, you can underline. And the eyes of the Lord, again, your God. Eyes, 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 eyes. Let me jump. I'm going to hold the slide here. I've got more in the PowerPoint, but I'm about out of time, and we'll have to do this maybe next time I come to finish this, all right? Because we're running up on 5 o'clock, and we have a different subject for after dinner. But instead, turn to a verse at the end of the book of Deuteronomy. Remember I said that Moses, in Deuteronomy, he opens his mouth in chapter 1 and doesn't stop until chapter 33? All right. 32. Chapter 32 is a poem of Deuteronomy. It's one of these concluding poems. He's about done talking. Anytime you see a poem, you should think singing, reciting, in a way that people remember, in kind of a melodic way that people remember. And in this poem, in Deuteronomy 32, which goes on for 43 verses, I just want to look at a couple of them to help us understand what these eyes are of the Lord your God, who has made and chosen a very difficult land and a very difficult people to live on the land. Why choose that and there? Maybe he's recognizing that no matter where people live, or no matter who people are, life is hard and people are rather difficult. Just happen to choose that people in that place to make the point. Verse 8 of Deuteronomy 32. When the Most High gave the nations their inheritance, when he apportioned the sons of man and set the boundaries of the peoples according to the numbers of sons of Israel. In other words, God chose Israel to be there, but other people he put other places too. Moses recognizes that God chose the Egyptians to be there and the Babylonians to be there and the Ojibwa and the Sioux to be here and the Lakota to be there and whatever, every place. All right, at least it's a place to begin. And set the boundaries, set the spots, the environment for peoples to be. People inheriting the next generation and the place to have a life. And you can sense the person after hearing that in verse 8, but what does God inherit? What does he inherit? Verse 9, the Lord's portion, his inheritance is, it's not place. It's not things. The Lord's portion is his people. Jacob is the allotment of his inheritance. God's inheritance is a chosen people to have a special relationship with. That's enough. The rest doesn't matter. That's enough. Verse 10, he, God, found him, Israel, in a desert land, in the howling wasteland of a wilderness. This is Sinai journeys. He encircled him, he cared for him, he guarded him as the apple of his eye. Like an eagle that stirs up its nest, that hovers over its young, he spread his wings and caught them, carried them in his pinions. The Lord alone guided him, no foreign god with him, made him ride on the high places of the earth, ate the produce of the field, made him suck honey from the rock, oil from the flinty rock, curds of cows, milk of flocks, fat of rams, lambs, breed of Bashan, goats, the finest of the wheat and grape. At this point, they're in Canaan, in the land they came out of the howling wasteland into this very full land that had everything that they needed to live. All right, fair enough. This is a poem that talks about the creation of a people being brought out of Egypt across a howling wasteland and put into a place that was full for them. A people, the creation of a people. And Moses is using the same language he used in Genesis 1 when he was talking about the creation of a place. Help me with Genesis 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And the earth was formless and void. Then from that formless void, he makes a place where people can live in Eden. Formless void. That Hebrew term is, verse 10, he found him in a desert land in the howling waste. It's the same word. The word to describe the Sinai is the same word to describe Eden before Eden was made. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was formless and void, and the Spirit of God, what's the word? Moved, or better, hovered over the face of the deep. Over the face of this chaos, Genesis 1, the Spirit of God hovers. The image is a bird just right here, looking down, ready to go and do something. Hovered. Like an eagle, verse 11 of chapter 32. Like an eagle that stirs up its nest, that hovers, same verb, over its young. He spread his wings, he caught them, he carried them on his pinions out of the chaos and brought them to the land prepared especially for them. And the poetry here is very subtle but very strong, where God takes people and takes place, situation in life, where he wants you, and brings them together and says, now you can be the place where I want you to be and you can be blessed. All right? But there's one more. He encircled him, he cared for him, he guarded him as the, verse 10, he guarded him as the apple of his eye. And maybe some of you have heard the phrase, Israel is the apple of God's eye. Have you heard of that phrase? Corrie ten Boom used it, and others as well. Guess what? There is a Hebrew word that means apple, and it's not this word. This is a different word. And some of your English translations read this way. He found him in a desert land, in the howling wasteland of a wilderness. He encircled him, he cared for him, he guarded him as the pupil of his eye. Pupil of his eye. That's an English word. Pupil of his eye. Guess what the Hebrew word is? I'll tell you what it is. I'll tell you what it is in English. All right? Little person. The Hebrew word is little person. Which, by the way, Latin, the word little person is the word pupil, the student, which also becomes the word for the eyeball. It's the same word. And I'll tell you, it worked in Latin, but it works in Hebrew as well. He guarded him as the little person of his eye. That's how much he cares for you. That's about the land to which the Lord God cares. The eyes of the Lord your God are always on it. The little man of his eye is on the land. How does that help? All right. I have 1 minute. It's 5:01. Here's what I want you to. You all have a neighbor. You all have a neighbor. Take off your glasses, and I want you to get close enough to look into each other's pupils and tell me what you see. Look into each other's pupils, and you tell me. You got to get closer. You got to get closer. It helps if there's a little bit of light other than artificial light. What do you see? You know what you do. What do you see? You see yourself. You see yourself. He cared for, guarded Israel like the little man of his eye. When God looks in the into the eyes of his people, when God looks into the eyes of his people, what does he see? When you look into the eyes of God, what do you see in his eyes? Yourself. Now, this is poetry. God doesn't have eyes. All right? This is poetry to help us get it. And what does it say in Genesis 1? When God created people, he created them in his likeness and image. Not as divine creatures, but there's something there that has the character and capacity of caring for and being like in the fullness of what it means to want to live and to know what it means to live in a land that is full. No matter what that place is you happen to live, even if it's as scrappy as this Middle East.